They found the tapes inside a wooden box, 12 of them stacked neatly, each labeled by hand. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. Every tape had a date, a direction, and a single word, wind. When the recordings were played, there were no voices, no music, no static from radio stations, just the low, endless sound of the Montana plains. But somewhere in those hours of wind, people swore they heard something else, a pattern, a pulse, something that made one man disappear. This isn't folklore. It's a documented mystery from rural Montana, 1997. Locals still call it the wind that remembered. Thomas Heller was not the kind of man people remembered easily. He was quiet, polite, the kind of neighbor who waved but rarely stayed long enough to talk. A retired sound engineer from Billings, he'd moved to a small farmhouse just outside Havre after losing his wife in a car accident. It was isolation by choice. He told the realtor he wanted a place where silence still meant something. The farmhouse sat alone among a stretch of wheat fields, 2 miles from the nearest paved road. The nearest neighbor could barely see his porch light at night. At first, Thomas passed the days fixing old radios and tinkering with his recording gear. But then he started walking into the fields at night, holding a microphone and a small recorder. He said he was studying wind direction. By spring, he had hundreds of tapes stacked in his basement, each labeled with a date, time, and a compass bearing. When asked why, he simply said, "Because the wind changes more than we think." His friend from town, Pastor Reed, visited him every few weeks to check in. He said Thomas's house always smelled of coffee and cold metal, like a studio frozen in time. One night, Reed found Thomas sitting perfectly still, headphones on, eyes closed. The tape was running. When Reed spoke, Thomas didn't answer. He lifted one finger and whispered, "Wait. Listen to that shift northwest. It's repeating." Later, Reed saw notebooks on the table, pages filled with hand-drawn sound waves. Not words, just patterns. When asked what he was hearing, Thomas said, "It's language. The air's trying to tell us something. You just have to be quiet long enough." Reed laughed at the time, but he admitted later the look in Thomas's eyes wasn't madness. It was conviction. By mid-1997, Thomas had rigged his entire home for recording. Small microphones were mounted along the windowsills, on the barn door, even near the old weather vane. He ran cables through the floorboards into the basement, where 3 reel-to-reel machines recorded around the clock. He'd barely left the house anymore. Groceries were delivered once a week by a teenager from town. Sometimes he'd leave short notes on the porch with cash tucked inside, asking for coffee, blank tapes, and batteries. The last note he wrote said only, "Need more tape. Wind's changing faster." On December 12, 1997, a massive snowstorm swept across northern Montana. Temperatures dropped below -30. Most residents stayed inside, but Thomas didn't show any sign of leaving his home. When the storm finally cleared 3 days later, his neighbor, a rancher named Walt Jenkins, noticed Thomas's door swinging open in the wind. When he called out, there was no response. He stepped inside and found the house cold, generator humming weakly in the basement. A half-drunk cup of coffee sat beside the recorder. The machine was still spinning, the tape flapping loosely on the reel. There were footprints leading out the back door into the snow, then nothing. No body, no coat, no signs of struggle. The sheriff's office logged it as missing under severe weather conditions. The case was never reopened. 7 years later, in 2004, a local auction house sold off the remaining contents of Heller's property. Most of it was junk, rusted tools, old electronics. But one box caught a teacher's attention. It was marked Audio Archive Wind Studies. Inside were 12 reel-to-reel tapes and a leather-bound notebook. The teacher, Laura Benton, planned to digitize them for her students as a lesson on analog sound. She started with tape 1, soft gusts, crickets, distant thunder. Tape 2, colder, sharper wind, faint metallic resonance. By tape 11, something new appeared. Every few minutes the pitch of the wind shifted in a rhythmic pattern, low, high, like breathing. Laura thought it was mechanical interference, but when she ran the audio through a spectrogram, the pattern resembled a pulse. A perfect, repeating human heartbeat. Laura contacted a professor of acoustics at Montana State University. He agreed to study the tapes. What they found was both simple and impossible. The frequency was real, measurable, consistent, not a glitch. But it didn't match any known sound sources. No power lines, no engines, no radio interference. The recordings were made using equipment too old to pick up modern frequencies, and yet the data was precise. Every beat aligned perfectly with a 72 BPM pattern, as if someone's heart had been recorded through. Experts offered rational theories. Temperature gradients causing resonant pressure waves, a train line vibrating miles underground, even a rare form of atmospheric standing wave. But none explained why the pulse only appeared on nights between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m., or why the final tape, the one labeled Response, contained 3 minutes of total silence, followed by a single, breath-like sound. The case drew quiet fascination. Audio engineers debated the findings in obscure forums. Skeptics dismissed it as coincidence, a man lost to grief, chasing meaning in chaos. Others saw it as something deeper, a reflection of how isolation changes the mind, how sound becomes company when silence turns heavy. Thomas's notebooks were eventually donated to Montana State University's archives. They contain no claims of supernatural contact, just endless calculations, sketches of wind direction, and notes like, "Sound holds memory longer than we think." Today, researchers occasionally revisit the tapes, partly out of scientific curiosity, partly because they can't quite shake the story. When played at normal speed, it's just wind. But when slowed down almost imperceptibly, the sound forms a low pattern that feels alive. Not human, not mystical, just the earth breathing, and one man's attempt to listen. Thomas Heller was declared legally dead in 2004. No trace of his body was ever found. The only surviving evidence of his work sits in a temperature-controlled room. Row 3, Shelf 14, a small box labeled Wind Studies. Maybe he was simply a grieving man who found solace in sound. Maybe he disappeared into the storm, searching for proof that silence remembers. Or maybe, and this is the theory most locals quietly prefer, he just kept walking that night, following the wind until it sounded like home again. The wind doesn't remember words, but sometimes it carries the shape of those who try to listen. This is one of America's quietest mysteries. No horror, no crime, just a man, a microphone, and a question we still can't quite answer. What did he really hear out there? Would you dare visit that place yourself?